A lot about Mark Kennedy, the master folder, the master teacher, the master squeaker, but that's not the Mark Kennedy I want to talk about. I want to talk about Mark Kennedy, the really groovy teenager, because that's the Mark Kennedy I first met. In high school, I and my teenage friends were very awkward, and we would socialize in large groups. We had this idea that if we were in large groups, somehow we were a little less awkward. During one of these group activities, one of our friends, Susie, invited this kid that she met at an ecumenical council youth group. The kid she invited was Mark Kennedy. And Mark Kennedy was really cool. And I mean really, really cool. We were amazed. Everybody immediately liked him. He was full of corny jokes even back then, but more importantly, he was full of wonderful stories about what it was like to start college, because he wasn't even in high school. He was a college student, and he didn't come from our town. He came from 5 towns over, but everybody loved him, and everybody immediately thought of him as an older brother. So every other activity from then on, we'd always invite Mark. He wasn't able to come that often, but he tried to do so whenever he could. He and I immediately bonded. He kind of took me under his wing and helped me socialize. He had me join his ecumenical council youth group, and we'd go places together, and he would come to every one of my high school shows. He even came to my high school graduation. Even then, Mark Kennedy did origami, and I thought that was very, very cool. So I searched all the local libraries trying to find a book on origami. They always had one, but it had the same 5 patterns in it, and I wanted something a little better. So in one library about 2 towns over, I found a very large, very dusty book. Turns out I was only the 2nd person who had ever taken that book out of that library. Turns out the first person who took it out was Mark Kennedy. I should have just asked him to begin with. But when I moved away to college and then to grad school and then started working, I never lost touch with Mark. He was always calling me, inviting me to do things with him, inviting me to some activity or concert or Shakespeare in the Park, and I always came. I got involved in science fiction fandom and went to conventions, and he started going to conventions too. And matter of fact, for years and years, every year we'd have a joint birthday party where we'd, at a science fiction convention, where we had throw a big party for both of our friends. At one point, my parents needed a house sitter, and Mark very generously moved into our house. At that point, my grandmother thought that since he was living in the house, he must have been a member of the family, and if he was a member of the family, he had to learn to be Jewish. So one day when he was the only one home, she came and she spent the whole day teaching him all her top secret Jewish recipes. Things she had never shared with anybody else. But in her mind, if he could cook Jewish, he was Jewish. Once at a science fiction convention, I was smitten by a wonderful girl there I met. Unfortunately, she lived in a completely different state. I lived in Pennsylvania at the time. She lived in New York. So I contacted Mark, and we talked about ways that I could maybe keep the connection going. He went out immediately and found her and basically set up our first date together without even asking me. And of course, when I married her, he was the best man. one Christmas, Kathy was pregnant. We were going to have our daughter Miranda pretty soon, and I was going to spend the entire Christmas vacation cooking things and making huge amounts of food so there'd be lots of leftovers for when the baby came. Unfortunately, when I got home from all my shopping mountains of food, just a second, there we go, from mountains of food, I got the call that Kathy was in the hospital and she was going to deliver 1 month early. So the first person I called was Mark and said, "Do you want a free 18-pound turkey?" Then I rushed to the hospital. He came over, he took the turkey and other perishables, and he put away the other food, which was nice. But when we got home with Miranda, right kind of on Christmas Day, it turned out he had decorated the entire apartment for Christmas and even got us a Christmas tree, which he had decorated with folded origami ornaments. Those ornaments we keep very carefully, and we put them on our Christmas tree every single year. So I have talked a lot about me, kind of more than I've talked about Mark, but when I think back on my life has always had a mark in it. Even though we haven't lived close, we almost never lived in the same state, but everything I've done and every important part of my life has always been something that I did with Mark. So now my life always had a mark in it, and at least I believe that it still does. Thank you.